What is the opposite of lament? And you would think it's something like praise, celebration, happiness. But we came to the conclusion the opposite of lament is not praise, it's actually dishonesty. And if we're not lamenting in our world, then we're not actually being honest before God. And I find that challenging for myself as well as for how we worship, what songs we sing. So that's what I'm holding on to. And that the opposite of lament is not praise, it's dishonesty.
Welcome to Psalms for the Spirit, a podcast about spirituality and resilience through the lens of the biblical Psalms. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Campbell back to the podcast. Karen is a musician, a Presbyterian minister, a peace builder, and currently serves with the Irish Council of Churches. She is also a longtime dear friend of mine, and over the years we have had so many overlapping interests and callings and life experiences that have shaped our work and our faith journeys and our friendship. Karen has lived and ministered in Northern Ireland, Kenya, and the United States, and she brings a deep understanding of how faith, music, and storytelling can help individuals and communities move through pain toward healing and reconciliation and hope. In this conversation, we explore an incredible project Karen has been involved in called Considering Lament, which emerged from the legacy of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Through gathering stories, engaging with communities, and reflecting on the Psalms, the project created space for people to voice grief and wrestle with silence and imagine new possibilities for healing. I have no doubt that you'll be enriched by what Karen has to share with us today. And whatever it is that brought you here, I'm so glad you're with us.
Rise up, O God, now, and judge the world. Nations bow at your command. Rise up, O God, now, and judge the world. All earth is placed in your hands.
Karen Campbell, welcome to the podcast again.
Thank you so much.
We talked on the podcast years ago when you were living in Michigan at the time, and now you're back in Northern Ireland. We're in the same country now, and we've just crossed so many paths in our lives. It's always hilarious.
A bit insane. Our lives kind of meet each other over the ocean waves many a time or on a flight. Rarely in the same country.
Right. Oh, I know, but it's always so nice to have you as a friend, a colleague, and also somebody who is about as obsessed with the Psalms as I am. So, or maybe more so, maybe we're equal in that way.
I think we spur each other on. I kind of listen into what you're doing and vice versa. And we just cheer each other along. That's what it's about.
I know. It is so good to have another person out there who's working on different Psalms projects and albums and settings and really clued into how the Psalms make such a big difference. And you've done a lot of work recently on a project that I want to hear all about. But before we go further, I just want to give our listeners a sense of who you are. And aside from all the titles of the officialness of who you are, how do you like to describe yourself to people, either personally or professionally?
Well, most of the time it's just Karen. It's how I like to start, and then we see where we go. But in the broader space, grew up in County Armagh in a town called Lurgan, which was a real hot spot for the Troubles growing up. So lots of stories of lockdowns, curfews, bomb threats, all of that, which, to be honest, we probably buried in our memory and didn't talk about a lot until you kind of leave your own country and go to places like Kenya and live, or America, and then you realize there's patterns of polarization all over the world, and we need to pay attention to that so that we can be authentic disciples in healing. So a large part of how I minister is through music, through art, because I think that gives permission for people to inhabit a space and learn in a safe way from other people. And so I'm a musician, I'm a pastor, Presbyterian ordained, but have ministered in not just Northern Ireland, but in Kenya, Nairobi, and also in Grand Rapids in Michigan for 5 years. But currently I'm back in Ireland and working for the Irish Council of Churches.
Yes, yes. You've definitely been around, haven't you? You've had a lot of different cultural experiences, and that really shapes who you are. It shapes your work. It shapes your approach to your spirituality. And yeah, so there's a lot of wonderful history there that you bring to everything that you do. So tell us about considering lament and this project that has lots of different elements to it. I would love for you to describe it to our listeners, and then also to hear the backstory of how that came about and how it was worked on over a period of time. And then recently there's been an event where you've launched it and you've shared it with others. So let's hear about the whole thing.
You know, like you, Kieran, worship's a big part of my life, and music, and what kind of music we sing, because that shapes our faith, and how we hold our memory in singing as well is so important, how we speak about our communities. And so this project was really wonderful and a real privilege to be invited into. It's a part 2. There was a Considering Grace project. So for people who don't know the Northern Irish context, after the peace agreement, there were many other iterations of agreements of how we heal people and heal the land. And the Stormont House Agreement in 2014 in particular said it's good for people to share their stories of pain, because that should encourage healing in the land. And so out of that, the Presbyterian denomination had the Considering Grace project, which to this day is the largest faith response to legacy. They gathered stories of 122 people in Northern Ireland, clergy, victims from the Troubles, first responders who were first on the scene after bomb threats. They learned from how clergy did funerals after tragedies and really spoke out and condemned violence. So it was a wonderful book that really was a gracious remembering of the past. But it yielded up challenge as well. Some of the challenges that you heard in the victims' stories where victims felt the support could have been stronger from the central denomination, even though local clergy were fantastic at being there and being present. There was at times an ambiguous silence with the denomination, and a feeling too that sometimes clergy functioned as chaplains to their own denomination and their own people rather than being bearers of reconciliation. So there were criticisms from Considering Grace. And so all credit to the Presbyterians Committee, the Council of Public Affairs. They took that on board and wanted to do a next phase 2. And that's where the idea of Considering Lament came out. And initially, they came to me and said, would you write a hymn that sums this all up? And I said, I don't think I can. I think that's a big ask to put all of that into
all just into one
neat
tidy package.
Right. But we talked more and we conceived the idea of, well, let's go back into those local places, into those regional task groups. And let's look at the Psalms of Lament and the imprecatory Psalms, those hard Psalms, and see how these Psalms sit alongside people's stories. Not that we were wanting to re-traumatize or go back into the pain, but as a way of being forward facing. Where is God in this? And how can these Psalms of lament help shepherd and channel some of the pain that is still very real? So we had 8 focus groups from very different geographical regions all over Northern Ireland. And for 2 years, we really just did Bible studies. We looked at one psalm per group. And from that, my husband David and I went away and we wrote music and we wrote words that tried to capture the essence of what was being said in those groups. And that's how the Considering Lament project was birthed. And we did the launch just over a month ago at the denominational headquarters and invited all kinds of civic leaders to it. And people shared their stories and we heard the Psalms being performed, the 8 Psalms for the first time.
Wow, what an incredible journey to have been on from the beginning to that point.
Right.
And I mean, it was 2 years of the focus groups, but then the prequel to that was probably a few years.
It's been a whole decade, actually.
A decade, wow.
Yeah, from the beginning of Considering Grace to Considering Lament. So it's ongoing work that's been done.
Oh my goodness. What was that like for you to take those words that had been, expressed through the focus groups? And I don't know how you collated that information. Was it that they present something to you, or were you listening in on those, or how did you get the words to work with for your psalm settings?
Yeah, it was a fascinating process. So before we entered into the groups, and I participated in each group and just listened in, I talked with some who'd been involved in the group and just tried to get a sense of the area, because not everyone in Northern Ireland experienced the Troubles in the same way. There's different narratives, right? And that's part of the challenge of healing. Some feel more like victims than others, and there's a real hierarchy of victimhood in our country. So how do you dismantle that? That's a whole big piece. But, for example, the further west we went, where you were closer to the border, we were hearing stories of ambush, that there were often attacks in fields, that farmers tended their cattle and their sheep. And then we looked at the ambush psalms, where the psalmist had felt ambushed in his spirit and by his enemy. And that was a good connector. And then the further west we went, where the like of Omagh had, a very difficult bomb. The Omagh inquiry, 25 years on, is happening now. And so issues of justice are still very prevalent and very relevant to people in Omagh and also in Enniskillen. And so we looked at psalms to do with justice. So, we made sure that there was a theme that we were bringing in to talk about, first of all. But then when we got into it, it was just fascinating to hear the stories, particularly in places where there had been bombs. When they began to speak of it, it was just like it happened yesterday, even though it was 30 years ago, and, just the raw pain. But I think we had a Roman Catholic critical friend in each group, and that was important because it's trying to bring narratives together in proximity in the suffering. And one woman who's been involved in peace work for decades now, she said, I've never been so up close to the suffering and pain of the other as I have in hearing these stories. So that's healing in itself, to bring people close but in a safe way, because like I said, you have to be so careful. You're not just rubbing salt in the wound, but you're allowing people to give them gentle permission to speak, or just to be silent as well. And then on the East Coast, where there weren't many bombs, where people were relatively safe, a theme that came up was silence, that whenever bombs happened, people didn't say a lot. It was better to say nothing. That's the name of the movie now. The Disney movies, Just Say Nothing. And so giving people permission to talk about the walls of silence, Psalm 39. That's what emerged from Psalm 39. And also God being silent and God being hidden, those more difficult theological issues that arise from these hard Psalms, giving people the opportunity to say, there are times God is hidden and God allows us in the Psalms to give voice to that. I find that incredible that in God's spoken word, God gives permission to talk about God being silent. So there are deep theological places that we were able to go to through looking at the lament Psalms. And I think that was important because growing up in the Presbyterian tradition, Psalms were really prevalent, and we sang a psalm or a paraphrase at the start of every service, but we rarely sang the Psalms of Lament. They were the lovely Psalm 23, Psalm 84, and 100th, the old 100th, but the Psalms of Lament were missing. And so I think it was an important project to dismantle some of the triumphalism that can creep into our worship and our liturgy, and to enable a more honest look at who we are before God and what God might want to say to us in our whole gamut of emotions too.
Rise up, O God, now, and judge the world. Nations bow at your command. Rise up, O God, now, and judge the world.
Oh my. Well, it must have been really fascinating to witness other people taking in the words of the Psalms in connection with the storytelling that was going on. So what did you witness as far as people making those connections between maybe identifying their own laments, but then, creating prayers or connecting them to the prayers of the Psalms? And what was that experience like for them? Was there a bit of healing that took place, or was there something cathartic about that?
Yeah. Well, I think there was learning for me and learning for the groups as well. The learning for me was be honest in what you're doing. I think there's always a tendency as songwriters to have nice, clean lyrics and tidy rhythms, but there's a lot of dissonance in the Psalms. And so whenever we wrote a psalm, we'd bring it back to the group because we wanted to make sure it was victim-centered, that they had full editorial control over what was being written. And the first psalm I brought back, Psalm 109, had the opening line, "My God, whom I praise." And they said, "Stop right there. We're not ready to praise."
Oh, wow.
So they changed the opening line to, "Why should I praise? You've been silent, God." And so that was good learning for me. Don't clean it up too quickly. Such a clergy
Impulse.
impulse, isn't it?
Yeah.
Clean it all up and make it good. So that was important for me to wait, listen well. Another learning was how we think of our enemy in the Psalms. We went to a lot of Psalms that talked about cursing the enemy.
Yeah.
And what do we do with that? There really are not nice things being said about the enemy. And what is a responsible way of dealing with it? And I think, we landed in various places on this. One was to say, well, it's okay in worship to say, "Here's what I'd like you to do, God, to my enemy." And you can get quite graphic and quite dark. But at the end of the day, it's up to you. You're the God of true justice and judgment. It's not for us to turn to the sword. So I think that can be healing, to recognize it's okay to vent, because God has bigger emotions than we do. We have to believe that we're not the ones with big emotions. God holds it and shelter us. So that was one thing, but also to recognize that the enemy's not out there, but in work of reconciliation, it's recognizing the otherness within ourselves that is still foreign to God, that is still an enemy before God. And how do we bring our own prejudice and recognizing, yes, at times we are victims, but we are also perpetrators too, and we have not always thought well of the other. So it's encouraging that deeper honesty, I think, in speaking about ourselves, about God, and about the other.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting that it might lead also into confession, that it's not just about kind of venting and
Right.
kind of saying, well, that person's doing this to me or my community, but it's also recognizing how we might be complicit or how we might be participating. And that's something I've certainly learned through being here in Northern Ireland for the time that I've spent here, is that we can't just project onto other people. We need to turn inward and say, well, what's my involvement?
Right.
How do I contribute to the dynamics and the structures that are in place?
Right.
Even subconsciously.
This response really of what is mine to do, and that element of self-interrogation, and confessing where we could have done more, confessing where we stayed silent when we should have spoken up. All of that was very important in the liturgies that accompanied the Psalms too. And also just a real consciousness of what does reconciliation look like. So each time we did the Psalm task group, we asked the group, what does the sound of reconciliation sound like to you? And I got this idea from a project in Manchester University that went into the Colombian rainforest where the FARC rebels had been.
Okay.
And they took recordings of birdsong where there had been gunfire to reimagine the space. So I wanted to try that out in the groups and say, in those places where there had been violence, what is the sound of reconciliation? And oh my goodness, they're just poured out the most amazing stories. So for one lady who'd witnessed a horrific cleaning up of the aftermath of a bomb, she talked about birdsong and birds, the sound of birds where there had been a bomb. For another who had his brother murdered, he said it's the sound of a baby crying, because he found out as he was researching the person who had murdered his brother that the murderer was born the same month in the same place as his brother. So his mother would have been in the same maternity ward seeing the baby of the one who had murdered his brother. And he said, for me, it's the sound of a baby crying, because that humanized the enemy. Right. So in Psalm 109, we've the sound of the Ulean pipes wailing like a baby crying to mimic the sound of reconciliation.
Oh, wow. Well, that's very powerful. My goodness. Well, we need to hear this music, and we need to know how to access these materials. Thank you for sharing with us that background. It makes it just so rich and powerful. And we want to be able to include lament in our worship, in our personal prayer as well. I mean, you've created these beautiful resources. So can you say a little bit about where people can access these? And, you've got liturgies as well. And so there's a whole package, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. So if you go onto the Presbyterian Ireland website and just Google Considering Lament, up should pop up in the worship hub, the actual launch of the evening. There are podcasts, there are the recordings, the audio recordings, and you can download the liturgies, you can download the sheet music. So our hope is congregations can use these laments, and they're very singable intentionally for congregations, all to get behind and enjoy.
Well, thank you for sharing about all that. There's so much to learn, and I'm sure there's a lot more that we could hear from you, but at least that gives us a taste and a glimpse of that incredible project that you've been working on, and it's now kind of come to completion. So we can now look for that ourselves if we need to turn to some resources for a special event or even to include maybe on a regular basis, because, there's always a space needed for expression of some of those more difficult parts of our lives, and that
Giving
healing
people
that is always needing to take
permission,
place.
absolutely. Given permission to cultivate a space to hold in worship that allows for lament is so important, I think. Not just our Advent and our Lent season, but other times where we just need to confess our pain and our brokenness before God so that God can do the healing and do the work.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Karen. So just before we close, what do the Psalms have to say to our world today?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking a lot about the lament Psalms in particular. And I was talking to someone recently, and we were talking about what is the opposite of lament. And you would think it's something like praise, celebration, happiness. But we came to the conclusion the opposite of lament is not praise, it's actually dishonesty. And if we're not lamenting in our world, then we're not actually being honest before God. And I find that challenging for myself as well as for how we worship, what songs we sing. So that's what I'm holding on to. And that the opposite of lament is not praise, it's dishonesty.
Oh my goodness, I think that's perfect. I think that makes so much sense. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for chatting with me today and sharing about that incredible project that you've been working on, and for that resource that is available for all to use. If people are looking for a way to connect in with the practice of lament through music, through liturgy, and to incorporate that into worship, this is a great place to turn. Thank you so much, Karen. It's been wonderful talking with you again. And I look forward to our paths continuing to cross in many different ways in the years ahead.
We'll continue to dovetail over the decades, Kieran. And thank you to you. You do such a great work and just keeping the Psalms in front of us. And I do think it's a time when we need the Psalms to keep us centered on who God is, centered on that wider gaze of perspective for all eternity. So thank you for what you're doing, and keep going, keep writing new Psalms so that we can both enjoy them.
Oh, thank you so much, Karen. Bye.
God bless. Bye.
You've been listening to Psalms for the Spirit with me, Kieran Young Wimberly. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you would leave a 5-star review so that others can more easily find it. And if you know someone who might be inspired by this podcast, please do pass it on. And finally, make sure you sign up for my podcast email list so you never miss another episode. Until next time, may our spirits find healing and hope in the days ahead.
Praise you, be silent no more, my Lord and my God, I'll give thanks evermore.